So actually, we don't have any open-ended remarks except of mine. So I want to say that we have around 40 people in the Zoom, and we have more than 150 registrations, which are seen our presentation in YouTube. So quite a big coverage. We have international development partners. We have representatives of diplomatic missions. We have expert community here on the call, and its presence is quite big. It's a big honor for us, for you, like attending our event. So this project, it happened thanks to support of GIZ and the Project Innovation Lab for EU Association, and we're really thankful for that. And it's called Assessment of the Impact of War on the Economy of Ukraine. There is a lot of information now about the impact of war, but we always try to be ahead of this process of this analysis, and we try to collect customized insights, provide you with customized data, and have a fresh view on the current situation. And Thomas Hobbes, the author of famous Leviathan, this big book about the state, the role of the state, he once said that the state should have some sort of a telescope, some sort of a spyglass, which the state needs to provide to its citizens to allow them to look into the future. And we see our role as an NGO to help the state to build such a spyglass and provide these key insights to the expert community, to international partners. That's why this event now is happening in English. But for Ukrainian journalists who are on the call, we'll share a short summary of this presentation in Ukrainian. The overall report is more than 70 pages, but we will share around 30 slides today for you. So let's start. We have a split in several dimensions. We'll cover topics of macroeconomic, then we'll have a deeper look into enterprise dimension, then we'll look at the sectors of economy, then we will see how the war impacted the distribution of people and businesses around Ukraine, how it changed it, and then we will provide you results of our modeling and some recommendations for the government and for partners of what can be done in our situation to make Ukrainian economy more sustainable and help it to survive the war and then recover in the future. So, as you all know, recovery of control of the territory began right in the first months of the occupation. And as of now, Ukraine has liberated around 53% of territories occupied since February 2022. And it represents around 1/3 of overall territories occupied by Russia since 2014. And you can see that at least 2/3 of Kiev populace came back. Those who moved away, they came back. 1 million of Kharkiv residents came back to the region. We can see that a large part of Kiev region, Sumy region, Chernihiv region were restored even before the 2022 ended. And the further liberation will bring Zaporizhia nuclear power plant to our control, and which is 20% of our energy sector. And it will also bring around 27% of our natural resources, which are currently occupied by Russia. So, and we shared the thoughts and the insights which we saw in the recent article by The Economist that, of course, we can rely on the counteroffensive and its success, and we can expect some results there. But we also need to be ready to work in the conditions of war for years, to be resilient, to have sustainable, self-sufficient economy. We totally share this insight. So, coming to the macroeconomic dimension. As you know, Ukrainian economy has had its ups and downs since 2008, like maybe last 20 years, and we always fall and we always recover. You can see that we had a fall, we had a decrease during COVID times, then we recovered, then we had invasion, and we had a 29% of decrease. Thanks to international support, this fall was not as big as many of us expected, because without the support, probably the fall would be closer to 50%. And without these anti-air systems, probably damage after this missile strikes on our energy system would be bigger. And at the moment, Ukraine is recovering with high rates, and during expert discussions about the speed of recovery, some experts expect even 5% of recovery throughout 2023. Important insight is that what actually constitutes this drop, and this drop consists of consumption, and it's similar to most of modern economies where consumption is the large part of economy. We can see that net exports drop actually inflicts a lot the drop of GDP, and the drop in investments actually inflicts this fall. If we have a look at this in more details, we can see this, that in 2021, we had recovery thanks to investments and thanks to consumption, and export was still dragging our GDP down. And in 2022, the same, a fall of export, fall of investment, and fall of consumption. And now we can see that due to problems with transport corridors, the export is still lagging behind, but investments and consumption are starting to recover. And it's important to say that this happens also because of international support. Without it, the consumption would be different. Without it, we could not spend as much on our army, on salaries, etc. It's important to mention that Ukraine had a long-lasting health problems in our economy. We had a deficit trade balance, and you can see these numbers here. And in 2022, this trade deficit achieved tremendous, like horrible numbers, like minus 26% in difference between export and import. And another important figure to look at is actually the dynamics of foreign investments. You can see that since 2012, we were doing fine, then invasion, then those investments recovered again. So the Ukrainian economy recovers all the time. And then COVID times, and then recovery, and then again invasion, and we have almost zero investments. And thanks to limitations on currency exchange markets, we have almost zero capital outflow. So if we look at our budget situation, you can see that we have a 52 billion of secured funding for 23, and it's still we still have some gap in that. It should be covered probably by internal loans, and that's quite a problem. You can see that defense sector is the huge contributor to budget spendings. What is also important to say is that we did some calculations how the budget of the peaceful Ukraine, let's say the 25th, 26th, will look like. And you can see that Ukrainian economy and Ukrainian budget will never be the same. Because before the war, we had government spendings like budget, pension funds, state enterprise, etc., around $80 billion. But now the war brings extra spending, so probably we will keep at least like 1/3 of our spendings on defense. We will probably add more on rehabilitation, on healthcare services, on veterans support. You can add freely like 10 billions to that. And then you have recovery. And even if we will see, let's say like 200 billions in 10 years for recovery from international aid, we will probably see 15 billions of investments from the private sector, and we still will have to spend governmental money because some of the expenditures can be done only by the state. We took this number by having $500 billion as a need because of the assessments of World Bank, and you can see the trend that these estimations are growing. So if you split it in 10 years, you will have this 50 billions, which we need throughout the year. And this makes our budget $113 billion per year, the budget of the peaceful Ukraine. And we will have the GDP probably higher than 160 billions, but definitely not $200 billion as we had before. And this budget doesn't balance at any stretch of imagination. And how our Minister of Finance says these numbers just blow his mind. So to have our economy self-sufficient, to make it actually possible to balance it, we need actually a GDP closer to $300 billion. And this GDP growth, this doubling of GDP is not any longer a question of comfort, a question of level of living. It's a question of survival of the country. Because if we don't do that, we will either have neither defense or social sector, and we will have social disaster, and we can see the urbanization of Ukraine, we can see the disappointment of population, Western support, and everything can happen. Ukraine definitely will be vulnerable to Russian comeback, and if it may happen, it may even provoke the Russian comeback in this situation. So we really need to look at the enterprise dimension and to private sector. And if you look, the Ministry of Recovery actually split Ukraine into 4 types of regions. So they call them frontline regions, where we have a current war zone. Then we have those regions who are mostly deoccupied and which are recovering. And we have supporting regions, and we have the rear regions. But if you look at the revenues, don't misinterpret it with GDP, because these are like sales of companies, and sometimes they sell into each other, so it doesn't constitute the GDP, but it's billion hryvnias. But it gives you the feel of the proportion. So, and the front line, we have this 854 billions prior to the beginning of the war. In recovering regions, these are those pinks, we have a big amount of business, and of course, like large part of it is in Kiev. But in supporting regions, in these regions who are also quite close to the country, we have also like a large amount of businesses running. And in RIA regions, in this light blue, we have only 1 billion out of, let's say, like 9. So it's not a huge amount of economy. So the status of these lands, the occupation, loans, development, infrastructure, recovery here in these central regions, this is what makes recovery. And this is important insight, in our opinion. So as of relocation, the data is quite limited, and not a lot of polls were made, not a lot of analytics were done. It's difficult to calculate some industries like agro, where we have a lot of these private entrepreneurs, and IT, where we also have a lot of private entrepreneurs. But if you look at the data available, it kind of suggests that around 20% of our business, they somehow partially or fully, they were involved into relocation processes. And the larger part is IT, with 46% moving and only 4% actually abroad, which is good. And small amount is planning to do that in the future. Manufacturing, 18%. And it's important that it not only moved inside Ukraine in the controlled territories, it allowed actually to keep the manufacturing, which was in lately occupied Rubezhne, Severodonetsk, other cities which were occupied and are still under control of Russians. So now we have those businesses, and it's important that they relocated. If we look at the regional split, so large part was received by Lviv, 24%, then Zakarpattia, then Chernivtsi, Ivano-Frankivsk, Khmelnytsky, Ternopil, and others were split equally, including Kiev, in this regard. And at some point, and in the last autumn, this relocation actually stopped, because you can see that 790 have moved, but the same amount actually of enterprises decided not to move because of the liberation efforts. So this is what is about relocation. But anyway, if we see like 20% of businesses moved, something we understand that it already have changed the economic geography of Ukraine. Then as of state, the condition of those enterprises. So we had like actually a great poll by Advantra Group together with Dia Business, and you can see that still, even in January 2023, we had more than 70% of businesses who were about to reduce their manufacturing or to suspend business in general. But if we look at the financing and how those enterprises receive credits, actually, micro level is quite vibrant. We have this 579 program. A large business, it's a bigger problem, because they don't get credits because of this business situation, and we will have a look at these sectors later on. This is the research made by National Bank, and it's very important. It's about the expectations of business, and if this index is higher than 50%, then it means that larger part of business is actually expecting something good from economy. So they feel positive about the growth, and we have achieved this results in recent months, which is good. And the same for consumer confidence index and other indexes. So the situation is getting better, but it's not super optimistic, of course. It doesn't provide us with the confidence that in long-term war, they will remain the same. So it's quite tricky at the moment. So as of sectors, you can see that we presented here 2010, 2021, and 2022. And in metallurgy, in mining, we have a drop comparing to 2015, comparing to 2010. In agriculture, we had growth, and then we have this decrease because of the war. In IT sector, we have constant growth. In manufacturing, we have a drop, and we will talk about it later. And energy export, which was quite high in 2010, it's now reduced. I must say that if we didn't have this strikes on energy system, probably our export could achieve this level again in EU in some given time. As of employment, you can see that mining and metallurgy drops, agriculture drops because the efficiency of this sector, IT grows and then drops because of the war, manufacturing drops constantly, energy sector drops constantly. The bigger problem is the level of economic complexity of Ukraine. So we can see that even our leading sectors such as chemical industry, electronics, mechanical engineering, the level of complexity is quite low. So it means that our added value is low in those sectors. And if we look at the popular situation, we always say that we either need extra 3 million people be brought back to Ukraine, or we need to increase productivity. And this is the slide about productivity. And you can see how dramatically we are behind our even neighbors in terms of economic complexity. And economic complexity is risen only with investments. Investments also do a magic thing with the exports. And we did this analysis. We had a look at 3 regions. We had a look at the world, our export to the world, our export to EU, and our export to CIS countries. And you can see that our old economy, our economy of Soviet times, our legacy, it drops all the time. So we lost our markets in for heavy industry, for example. We lost those markets in CIS countries. We gained a bit, but we did not compensate in EU, and we dropped it in the world. In fossil fuels and minerals, we have the same situation. Lost CIS markets, did not improve in EU, did not improve in the world. Only those sectors where we have vibrant investments, only in those sectors where we have our SMEs investing every year into their marketing, into their production lines, we have a success. So agriculture growing in EU, growing in world, electrical and optical equipment, the same, lost CIS markets, but recovered in EU and are fighting for the world. So it means that we do need investments, and we cannot think of our recovery without speaking about investments. As of agri sector, it has a drop of 30%. Price situation actually saved the day a bit. And for those cultures which actually are profitable to export, which are less dependent on infrastructure, blockade of ports, problems with railways, those sectors, they had a more or less like normal drop, taking into consideration the scale of the war. But for those where there is a huge dependence on logistics, we can see a larger drop in export, like minus 55% in wheat as a good example. In general, we can see that oil production dropped and milk production as well. So these 2 sectors, they actually show that deindustrialization of Ukraine has reached like hyper speeds with this invasion, and we need to have it in mind. As of mining and metallurgy, as you can see, that 66% of our coal mines are actually occupied, and the work was suspended on 10% more. In metallurgy, we have drop in export of iron ore because of blockade, because of occupation, because of several large Metinvest factories were destroyed and occupied. In byproducts, a huge drop, rolled steel, manganese. So it happens that Ukraine, which has one of the biggest and cheap to extract iron ore deposits in the world, cannot use it. That's why this liberation process is quite important. We cannot just freeze the battle line here. It's just not an option for us, because iron ore, metal, is also a building material of the future, as well as titan, as well as lithium, because modern construction is done through metal, not with bricks and concrete anymore. Export consumption. So 60% of our generation was heavily damaged. If we look at the losses, the bigger losses are in electric distribution, some in generation, and we have a huge bill to recover our factories and its infrastructure. And you can see that import and export are balancing, they're going up and down, up and down. And the common sense actually tells that in the middle of November, we will face new cutoffs. We don't know the scale, but common sense tells that it will happen, and business should prepare itself to that. Even despite we have dramatically increased our interconnect with EU, but still it will be not enough probably, yeah, in winter. So manufacturing and constructions. So as expected, of course, like support from international partners and some road constructions and some bridges construction, etc. They allowed this sector not to disappear at all, but still it's a 56% drop. In manufacturing, 29% drop. Of course, a lot of military products are moved to internal production. In the beginning of the war, actually, almost 80% of light industry products were bought abroad for the militaries. But now almost 100% of light industry products for militaries are bought inside Ukraine. Food, vests, helmets, almost everything is produced now in Ukraine. And as for the exports, we had actually, unfortunately, we had 17% of exports in Russia and Belarus, but even that now, of course, is lost. I think we had to do that many years before. And overall exports declined on 30%. In military sector, we have huge spendings on militaries. And if we look at how Ukraine finances military startups, you can see that we finance almost 70% of applicants in military tech startups. In Horizon 2020, the rate was, I think, about 8%. So Ukraine finances almost everybody who comes to get financing for military startups. In IT export, you can see that the number of people engaged actually dropped, and you saw that 46% of this industry somehow relocated inside Ukraine and abroad. You can see that the export of our services is still growing, which is good. And I think we need to keep any changes to the sectors away from this sector in terms of tax and everything. Now let's look at the regions. Here, the lack of data is the biggest. And we were obliged to use some creative approaches to understand the changes in the regions. And we started from electrical consumption. And you can see that there are some regions in which consumption did not fall to 30%. We highlighted it in blue. If it's minus even 10, if it's above the average drop of GDP, then it's good, because if you have this drop in GDP, then actually the whole country should be around 30%. But you can see that some regions did not fall that much. And this is the data, we checked it in August. So it was before this strikes on energy system. And it also correlates with, we also used for quite a creative approach. We checked the nightlight data by NASA. And of course, if you have like more than 8 million people moved away, some of them returned, even up to now, like around 6.5 million people are abroad in the EU and other countries. But if you have some family members left, then you still have a light in the house, even if in this house not the whole family resides, but some people reside. So this drop, if you look at the previous slide, so drop in consumption is higher than drop in lighting, but still you can see the difference. And actually using these approximations, you can calculate changes in the populace. And I think it will be closer to something in between energy consumption and this light industry. And you can see that a lot depends on the continuation of the war. A lot depends on our success, on the way we recover our economy, the way we create working places. So consumption, I just want to remind you that consumption drives economy pretty much. So actually, all the people coming back to Ukraine is good news for economy, and we can see that number of vacancies is actually increasing, and number of CVs is dropping down. So people are finding the job and unemployment falls. So it's a good news for recovery. Then we checked the loans which were received by enterprises and by populace. And you can see that enterprises also are quite vivid in those RIA regions and in this recovery regions. But I just want to remind you again the importance of this central Ukraine. And if you look at the statistics and analysis of how the CFTA impacted Ukraine, most of companies which export to EU are located in this central region. So the level of control, level of anti-air missiles systems is super important. So we joke that entering NATO, joining NATO is the best economic strategy. But during the war, providing more air support to Ukraine, providing those F-16s, Gripens, whatever you name it, and providing this SIM sites, anti-air missile sites, it's a good economic measure to keep the economy on the flow. And as for the people, you can also see that those regions which are far away from the war, they are more vivid in terms of getting credits. We also want to say that from our previous researchers, investments are super dependent on distance. And if you look at the map of Europe, then you can see that starting from Brussels and Paris and Berlin, the density of investments per square meter, so to say, is falling. And from that, we can say that probably EU integration will impact like the left bank of Ukraine, some parts of the right bank, but in general, we need to think of the programs for those regions which now become a dead end after the war with Russia. So it's a dramatic change in terms of population, in terms of business relocation, and we can witness it right now, right, with our eyes, with this spyglass, which I was telling in the beginning of the presentation. So in terms of modeling and recommendations, we had a quite complex model. We used that while being a platform for national economic strategy for 2030. We use it for anti-COVID programs, and it's quite a combination of model of macroeconomic equilibrium and system dynamic model and gravity model. And we check those hypotheses with Ministry of Economy while making the national economic strategy. And we check the input, so it's more or less quite close model, some advanced in Ministry of Economy, more advanced in some aspects in our case. But anyway, we have these assumptions. You can look at in the report we'll send later on. But anyway, we can say that achieving this doubling of economy and getting closer to $300 billion dollars in GDP, in real GDP, it's not nominal, it's real GDP. It's actually quite doable if we fulfill recommendations, if we develop export. You can see that those plans are developed in export. We actually checked Ukraine facility, the plans for sectors which are planned to be developed, and these numbers are reflected here. So you can see this metallurgy sector, you can see IT, you can see agriculture, processing. So this everything is here, and doubling GDP is a possible scenario. We just need to plan it and to act accordingly. In terms of what the government probably should do, we thought a lot about it. And we analyzed what is already been done in the cabinet, what is either not done, or the speed is, we would like the speed to be actually higher as citizens of Ukraine. And we can split it into 3 chapters. And first is create attractive business environment. And we actually act a lot in the sphere of deregulation and improving business environment. And we also need an adequate industrial policy, because we see from the polls that large companies, they need coordination, not even money. They need coordination, they need policies, they need facilitation and everything. So in this regard, the regulation is ongoing. Group is meeting almost every week, sometimes at least 2 times per month, I think they meet. In strategic bets, Ukraine facility is very important work, and Ukraine is defining those strategic bets. There is a big discussion about tax reforms, and channels of promotion and support of investments are also well developed. What we would like to be added is actually more focus on business climate, reform of law enforcement agencies, and digging deeper into industrial policies, understanding if investor is good in Ukraine, if profit for investor is good, because recent legal prosecutions, they are actually sometimes against this statement. Second large chapter, which we recommend to focus, is actually the ability to manage projects at the national and regional level. And unfortunately, the recovery process took a year actually to be established. So the agency for recovery was established only in January 2023. And the multi-donor coordination platform was established only a year after the beginning of the war. But now they meet as well as in this military Rammstein. So this financial Rammstein is also meeting every month, which is good. And in this regard, the electronic project management system was introduced, and at the level of regions, the agency is working on creation of network of regional project offices. But what we need to do more, I think we need to do more researchers the way we did in this case of our research. We need to understand economic geography better. We need to understand programs of the regions. We need to understand how EU actually integration inflicts those regions in real, in every sector. And we need to increase the scale of project preparations, because even if we fundraise, even if we mobilize a lot of money to that, then the project preparation will be a big gap. So we need to have schools, we need to have local agencies which will teach people to make projects, because now only I think international financial companies, corporations, they actually have this capacity, like IBRD, AFC, they have this project capacity, but not more probably. And the third large chapter, it's a central government ability to manage this complex process of transformation. And the government has good experience with national economic strategy, with actually the so-called triangles or troika plans, which were developed shortly, like prior to the beginning of the war. And the government expected to adopt the new program of the cabinet actually in March 2022, but the invasion happened. But anyway, the government has capacity to do result-based management planning, and hopefully this Ukraine facility will transform in this sort of plan. And EU integration, we have a good process, all forces are there, but we think that we need actually to think more about institutional capacity. We need actually an army of lawyers, of negotiators, not only lawyers, but also economists who will take part in these negotiations. And we also think that we need to transform the center of the government, because the capacity of the Secretariat of Cabinet of Ministers is quite limited in terms of coordination of policies. And if you look at our legal base, the only body, the only person who can coordinate different policies between different ministries is actually the Prime Minister. But we don't have any center of the government. We don't have the strong single unit for financial planning, for economic analysis, for legal acts. So I think we need to centralize that, and we will be happy if international partners support this reform, definitely. So in terms of sectors, so our business, they meet the loss of manpower, long-lasting logistical problems, financial instability, and the overall resilience. And what are recommendations? It's quite good. So introduce policies which will allow internal displacement people and forced migrants to come back, to get credits, to get houses, to get transport support. But I think that the conditions should be the same for internally displaced people and for those who are abroad, because we have more than 5 million people inside Ukraine, and they have almost similar situation to those abroad. So no different policies for those who are abroad and for those who are inside the country. And we need to establish the new routes. We need to, that our Ministry of Recovery actually would think more about EU standard railways, about roads, about transition routes, and we need to think about faster European integration to have those regions integrated into European value chains. And as for the SMEs, we need to finance them more. Small enterprises, they definitely need grants. Micro, they need grants. It's a good idea actually for our Western partners to establish credit programs for business with a cheap cost of money, and probably this would be a good way to support Ukrainian economy, not providing grants, but providing credits and intensifying investments of their own businesses to Ukraine. I think UK is moving in this direction. Poland definitely moved to that direction. And there are mechanisms for military insurance. There are different stimulus for those businesses, national businesses, opening business in Ukraine, and this is definitely good. We need more of that. In sectoral, I will not go into deep details, but we have recommendations for almost every sector. We checked different packages of technologies which can be used, and you can find it in this report later on. And the same for the regions. This is quite generic recommendations, but we definitely need to think of investing into military and defense sector. You can see our budget for 2024. It has large investments into production of military equipment. We have news that it can be done together with our Western partners. In regions, to bring back people in this recovery in regions, we need to recover infrastructure, because it is economy. It will allow economy to sustain. It will allow economy to feel okay during 6 years of war, if it needs, or longer, the way Russians see this conflict. Of course, hopefully it will end much earlier. And we need to coordinate regions in this development, because if you look at what regions think of themselves, not every region actually has data and capacity to think strategically about their own fate. And for the rear regions, this is where we can go full scale, invest in developing industrial parks and having it as a real backbone for Ukrainian economy. This was quite a short, I would not say that this was a big project, but I think we got some interesting insights, and we definitely see that together with other analytical centers, we can dig deeper into macro situation. We can study those impact further and check those electricity outages impact, etc. In enterprise level, I think we can go also deeper into polling, because not a lot of data is now available in terms of this economic geography. In sectoral, same things, more consultations, more polling. So we need to understand better the situation, because data is quite limited at the moment. And the same for a regional economic geography. So the forecast can be improved. We review it every half a year, I would say. We work on a project together with Gleb Vishlinsky, who is at the call on macroeconomic forecasts, and we're checking military scenarios with our militaries. They are changing again, like every half a year, I think. But we definitely keep the hand on this. Thank you very much. I'll stop the presentation now, and so we could switch to the panel. Let's check if every panelist, which we expected, is now on this call. So Gleb Vishlinsky, I can see you. He's the head of Center for Economic Strategy. Hello, Gleb. Then we were expecting actually representative of EU, Mr. Alberto Fernandez Diaz, head of trade and economic section, delegation of EU to Ukraine. I can see you. Hello. We are also expecting Alexei Sobolev on this call, but I was informed that he will join closer to 11 o'clock. And we also invited Anna Derevyanko. Oh, I can see Anna. Great to see you here. And Dmitry Livch, he's a co-founder of Center for Economic Recovery and the head of NGO Easy Business, which is strong in economic analysis. And I would suggest to reflect a bit more on what you saw, and maybe we can come up to some joint recommendations for the government and international development partners. I don't know whom to start. Maybe we can start from analytical part from Gleb Vishlinsky, because you are the closest to what we do. What is your reflections on what you saw?
Kirill, thank you for inviting me. Your presentation was very good and covered everything we see as well, and majority of your recommendations are in line with our thinking. What I want to mention and like what is my reflection on what you said is that how we see that the scale of challenges that we have, and the even number of things that are to be done, and complexity of them is enormous. And in fact, it connects a lot to what you recommend in terms of public administration, as currently we do not see enough capacity in the government, like without this institutional changes that you mentioned, to work on these issues. So what we need to go further with it is like beside not only domestic understanding of these challenges and of these issues, and I believe that we together need to do more in communication to domestic audience, to domestic stakeholders, politicians, civil servants, that they have this issue, and you just could not say about problems to resolve them. But also we need help from our European partners, from the European Commission, from the EU delegation in going forward. Fortunately, we have this process revolving around Ukraine plan within the EU facility for Ukraine, and we see a lot of like not just words, but a lot of things that have already been done by our European colleagues in helping the Ukrainian government in developing this plan and fully understanding lack of capacity that the government has. Speaking about substance of the challenges and what you presented, I believe that regional aspect is really very important, and sectoral is like I understand, like I believe more clear to comprehend, and we have historical structure of like ministries, sectoral departments everywhere that could at least somehow analyze and deal with it. However, when we speak about this sometimes seismic shifts in regional structure of the Ukrainian population, of the Ukrainian economic output, enterprises moving, like production facilities moving from those areas closer to the contact line to safer areas. Also, labor force sometimes helped by their employers to move, sometimes trying to be collected on those locations where companies are relocated to, is very complicated, and I believe that there should be more joint focus of both businesses, and Anna is here, and maybe Anna could also comment on whether businesses try to somehow coordinate this process of trying to find new locations and trying to also relocate people there to build some housing, or to rebuild some housing in those safer locations, to get both IDPs from unemployed to employed, to get refugees into IDPs by like people from areas that are either occupied or destroyed, to go back to Ukraine, but to another region to get a job on the relocated enterprise. I understand that it is very complicated in planning. However, our international partners partners, businesses and government, I believe, could jointly work on this. Otherwise, we could lose a lot of labor force and a lot of potential output. And finally, I just want to reiterate how important is macrofinancial support of Ukraine to economic revival. At the very beginning, Kirill, you mentioned that Ukrainian economy needs to grow fast, just to keep going, just to be able, Ukraine as a country, to withstand the enemy. And this macrofinancial help that we plan to receive this year, more than $40 million, and we need the same amount for the next year. It is very important for maintaining domestic consumption and also at least small-scale domestic investment. And it is the sort of like lifeline to market economy, to private businesses that just do what they need to maintain their operations, to remain profitable, to use opportunities they have otherwise, like without this like just money coming into the system, stimulating competition, stimulating healthy market forces. We could see much weaker Ukraine in this war that Russia started against us. Thank you.
Thank you, Gleb. As of macroeconomic, also, I did not say that during the presentation, but if you look at the numbers in budget of 2024, because of some of the help which we received was not grants, but a lot of was in form of credits. Actually, we see that financing our debt next year, those numbers, they are reaching almost numbers of what we spend on militaries. And I think next year may be the year when we will get less international assistance than we spend on our debts. So the trajectory is quite horrifying, I would say. And we probably need to think about access to capital to everybody. And we can see that business and medium and small and large, they kind of restructured, they reformed. We can see that number of outstanding credits has like stabilized, not fallen, and a lot of needs to be done there. And probably we do need to shift paradigm, as the economist wrote, the paradigm of let's not expect like fast success from the counteroffensive, but let's think together with partners how to develop Ukrainian economy to make it more sustainable in the long term for years to come, and probably bring in much more investments to the country. So I would like to pass the floor to Alberto. So the question for you would be, what do you think, first question, like how EU integration can help Ukraine in this process, and how it actually connects with those regional transformations in Ukraine? Do you see these connections? And second question, what do you think of the perception on the West? So do we see a change from this approach that he will give you money for 2 years, he will give you weapons for 2 years, please win the war, show us some success, and we will see what's the perspective. But what is the perception now?
Hello, hello, good morning, Kirill and colleagues. And first, thanks for the useful presentation. And as usual, we're very busy implementing things here, and sometimes we don't have time to think. So this work that we're doing is certainly very useful for us to map a bit and understand the bigger picture of what's going on in Ukraine. And as was mentioned by Philippe, we're working intensively on the Ukraine plan. Maybe I will just mention three main comments. First is about the Ukraine economy as a whole. We have been following the evolution of the Ukraine economy for a long time, and the Ukraine economy has suffered several blows over the last 10 years, 10-15 years. So the financial crisis in 2009, COVID, 2014, 2015, the GDP had not recovered the previous value. And the biggest blow definitely was 2022, minus 30% GDP decrease. And that certainly had a negative impact, not only on the production capacity of the country, but also on the overall macroeconomic situation. So that's why, from our side, from the EU side, we were clear that we needed to provide support, quick support. In our case, in 2022, this came in the form of macrofinancial assistance, mostly. As Philippe mentioned, there was a fiscal gap of around 40 billion, half of which, roughly, we have provided. We have already provided 13.5 billion so far this year, and we're about to provide 4.5 until the end of the year. And of course, we have presented this proposal on the 20th of June of the Ukraine facility, up to 50 billion. That is expected to, in a big part, to fill the gap, the fiscal gap. If you see the budget that was presented on the 15th of September, the estimation is roughly the same, 40 billion in foreign financing needs, half of which were expected more or less to cover together with our partners. In the context of how to orchestrate, how to define, to implement this aid, there are many uncertainties. We cannot really forecast easily. And one of the biggest challenges that we discussed in the context of the plan, and that we have seen today in your presentation, Kirill, is that forecasting is extremely difficult. There are many question marks about migration, about the future of the war. Some months ago, we thought that the war was going to end quicker. Now there is talk about a longer lasting war. There was a very good article this week in The Economist, I guess that you saw it, about the need for Ukraine to prepare for a longer conflict. And we are also factoring this element in our assessment and in our policy. That's why one of the key elements of the plan is not just about providing support to Ukraine to bridge the budget gap, but also to incentivize productivity and to make sure that Ukraine is in a position to get enough revenue internally in order to finance the war effort, of course, which will be complemented with the support that we're providing. On the case of the EU, we have been clear. We have already made the proposal for a longer time frame until 2027. And this plan, you know very well, the Ukraine facility, the 3 pillars, so I don't need to go in detail into that, is going to be underpinned by a plan that is expected to incentivize and to activate investments. And that's the key. What you mentioned about the sectors, there are 2 key sectors on which Ukraine was very strong before the war, that is metallurgy and raw materials. That's very important for the European Union as well, but also agriculture. So on those 2 sectors that together jointly were more than about half of the exports of Ukraine to the European Union and a big, so to say, source of revenue, we are working. Of course, we have, again, a lot of uncertainties, not only about investment. We need to devise tools or instruments to mitigate the impact of the war in the investments. War risk insurance, there is a pilot by MIGA. We are working with other partners in international financial institutions to get a better and more efficient way of locking in investments. I like a lot your distribution in 4 types of regions. I think that's very wise in the current context, because this is a way of this traffic light approach is a way of incentivizing investments in those regions that have less risk, and that will also help us to define the architecture of an eventual insurance mechanism. But we also have the uncertainties around other factors, such as migration. How many people is going to come back? When? The forecasting is not that easy. Energy. How resilient will be the Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and how this is going to impact the investment decisions, for instance, in big factories, where to put it, and how to make sure that we mitigate to the maximum the potential negative impact of in the energy sector. Another point is tax revenue. So how to make sure that Ukraine is going to get a lot of revenue, enough revenue. In the budget, there was an increase, if I'm not wrong, I think from 1.2 trillion in 2023 expected to 1.5 trillion in 2024. This is quite an increase. We understand that a lot of that is going to come through tax reform. So there has to be a smart way to deal with fiscal policy and how to make the business pay a fair share of tax. On that, Anna can develop in a way that does not jeopardize, does not penalize companies that pay taxes. So it has to be done in a fair way. In this context, the accession track, the fact that Ukraine is now a candidate country, is an incentive for reform. This is a view that is also shared by the United States. You might have followed the latest debates in Washington about conditionality attached to the budget support that they are going to grant. In the EU case, we currently have macrofinancial assistance, so this is linked to conditionality. We just after this conference, we have a call this afternoon with our Ukrainian partners in the Ministry of Finance to discuss conditionality for the next tranche. So the same applies to the United States. So key reforms, rule of law, anti-corruption reform, and then subsequently other reforms that are linked to accession. And this is going to provide investors with some incentive because they will be investing in a country that has a similar climate, regulatory climate, and guarantees more similar to the European Union than before. And that's a key element as well to lock in investments into the country. And finally, about you mentioned the perception in the West. I repeat that the European Union has already made this proposal for 50 billion. Of course, this has to get through Parliament and Council, but we are optimistic. And of course, in a couple of weeks, we will present the enlargement package with a recommendation. You will see, and in this package, we will basically do an overall assessment of the state of play of alignment of the Ukrainian legal framework and how fit Ukraine is to join the European Union, and whether that justifies opening accession negotiations already this year, which could be decided eventually by the Council. But you have seen in the press a lot of news about this. Of course, nothing is decided yet, and at the end, the final decision lies on the Council. So, in a nutshell, we have a lot of challenges and uncertainties. It's very difficult to forecast how the war is going to continue, but the trend, I mean, so to say, the agreement is that we have to get prepared for a longer conflict, probably, which means that Ukraine has to be in a position not to depend 100% from foreign donors, money, including EU, US, IMF, but also by increasing the revenue potential of the domestic industry. Ukraine has a huge potential. Investors in Europe, in the European Union, are very interested in Ukraine. But one of the, besides the war, of course, which we're trying to mitigate with different instruments, one of the elements that it will be very important to make sure that investors make the final decision to join, to invest in Ukraine, is the regulatory framework and the guarantee that their investments are going to be protected and are going to operate in an environment that is familiar to them. And that's one of the key issues we're looking at. So many of you are involved in the discussions on the plan, so you're acquainted about the sectors and the reforms that are being discussed there in this context. And yeah, so that's more or less the overall situation. Of course, on top of that, we have to look at trade and the problems that we have with logistics. And if we invest in a sector, there are two main factors that we have to consider. First is the domestic consumption. So, for instance, in the case of metallurgy, I don't think that metallurgy is a sector that will rely much on foreign markets, because the reconstruction itself will require a lot of that materials to reconstruct the country. So that's something that has to be considered. But there are other sectors, such as agriculture, where there is potential for bringing more added value to Ukraine in terms of processing. And this also will contribute to increase the tax revenue in the country, in Ukraine. But also we need to get those products out of the country. And in the current situation with the Black Sea closed, the Ukraine corridor is timidly working now. There are some boats coming in and out, but it's far from the previous situation, of course. On solidarity lanes, you have seen the tensions that we have with some member states. We are working on that. So we have a multivectorial mosaic of so to say, complexities that we have to tackle in the current situation. And all of that is underpinned by a very uncertain forecasting. But the important thing is the commitment. I think the political commitment that the European Union, from our side, is going to stand with Ukraine in a smart way. And the talk is about getting Ukraine to the buy-in of Ukraine. So Ukraine is not just an assisted country. Ukraine is a robust, has to be a robust economy with its own legal framework that can create wealth that does not depend 100% on foreign funding. But we, of course, as international partner and a key partner of Ukraine, will be ready to chip in with the needed resources, and we will mobilize the G7. We're working with the G7 and other like-minded partners to continue this path. With what happens in the US, I don't want to comment on that in 2024. That's another story, but we're also monitoring that with them. And the visit by Zelensky last week to Washington was a clear indicator of the importance that the US also has for Ukraine. So that's more.
As far as I understand, after this Ukraine facility plan will be ready in Ukraine and discussed with EU, probably there will be a presentation for our partners across the ocean, and more practical discussion will start. Alberto, thank you very much for your insights. It's super great to have such professional on board of Ukrainian recovery, and the things you say are quite inspiring. I have a message from Alexei Sobolev from the Ministry of Economy. He will join in 5 minutes. And I would like to ask Anna Derevyanko for some reflections, because polls show that Ukrainian business expectations are kind of 50-50. So it's a little bit like more positive than negative expectations. But what do you think may shift? What do you think may shift the perception of Ukrainian business? And what can allow them to actually to invest here, but not abroad? Because we see that a lot of businesses are considering full relocation abroad, away from the war, away from this conflict. What is your take on this problem?
Thank you so much, first of all, Kirill, for inviting and for making a very structured and very nice report. It looks very good to me and appeals to what we have in our surveys and the estimations of sentiments of business. The title of our panel is "How can Ukraine recover from the war and how to build back better?" And in this respect, I think that the obvious answer would be is involvement and mobilization of private sector. Hence, it's very important to keep economic activity in Ukraine, as well as retain the macroeconomic stability. Since private sector is important for successful and green recovery, let me add a few things which I think can echo what Kirill and others have already mentioned on how business feels at the current stage and what forecast it gives for the next year. Because actually, majority what we've heard today was a little bit of more like pessimistic, but I would like to add a little bit of more optimism, because when I talk to various businesses who are members of the EBA, I feel how resistant they are and how strong they are and how strong spirit they have. When it comes to our surveys, they confirm that business stands and it holds the economic front. And 99% of big and medium-sized companies are fully operational. They continue to work. The situation in SME business is a little bit worse because 7% of companies had to suspend their operations. When it comes to continuing paying salaries, 93% of our members continue to pay salaries in full. When it comes to small and micro companies, 56% of members of small and micro companies continue to do so. When it comes to support to the country, practically everyone does it. Unfortunately, businesses continue to lose money, obviously, because of the war. For 16% of our entrepreneurs, war-related losses have exceeded $10 million. Another 35% reports losses in the range of $1 to $10 million. And 35% of our respondents report losses up to $1 million. When it comes to the number of mobilized workers in the member companies, the quantity of them has remained more or less unchanged, stable. But I would think that actually currently companies perceive that this is going to be one of the major challenges for them to retain people. And it might also explain why the number of vacancies also grow in Ukraine and why they are filled in as well in the very speedy mode. When it comes to businesses and global cooperation, we see also that companies would like to work with outside world. And it is also somehow explained that they would like to save themselves as well, because you cannot concentrate always on the internal market, which is going down. So in this respect, in order to stay afloat, companies need to find mechanisms and ways how to export, how actually to cooperate with global counterparts. And here the situation improves a little bit step by step. For example, 19% of SMEs are already exporting their products abroad, while 14% are establishing contacts, negotiating, or obtaining necessary permits. So in this respect, I guess I would not actually block those companies from working international partners. On the contrary, we would make everything possible in order to allow them to actually to somehow be closer to European markets and to find their counterparts and partners there. When it comes to forecasting next year, more than half of companies, our members, predict both a positive dynamics of their business development. Companies are improving their financial indicators forecasts. Most managers expect revenue growth in 2022. 72% expect an increase in hryvnia, and 55% expect growth in physical terms. In their budgets for 2024, actually, they average mentioned 41 hryvnia per dollar as exchange rate, which corresponds to the forecast of the Ministry of Finance. For comparison, for this year, companies actually budgeted 43 hryvnias per dollar, and basically we outperformed. So nowadays we have a slightly better situation compared to the viewpoints and forecasts of our member companies. When it comes to hiring people, 2 of 5 CEOs plan to hire new people next year, and 87% of our members will increase salaries next year. The number of companies planning investments has increased from 19% to 26%. So it shows that actually companies transformed to the new normality, and they actually perceive that these military risks will be with them in 2024, although the hope, of course, exists that the war is going to be over next year, mid-year. But nevertheless, still for planning purposes, companies understand that they need to be more conservative and somehow try to learn how to operate successfully during the wartime. And I can really tell you that with majority of companies with whom I work and actually talk to, they manage to stay cash positive even throughout these turbulent times. And even despite the fact that their turnover might drop, but nevertheless cash positive approach remains. The business traditionally lists fight against corruption, need of judicial reform, and actually introduction of rule of law in the country, and ensuring macroeconomic stability as top 3 assignments for the government. Basically, these top 3 remain as our key homework for a number of years. That will help in case we fulfill this homework, that will help to develop our business climate, and it will help to attract new investors to the country. It will actually retain those ones who are in the market and also attract the new ones. So what can help Ukraine to build a better future? Of course, our victory is the main precondition. Then second, it's necessary to concentrate on assignments to the government: fight of corruption, introduction of the rule of law, and keeping the macroeconomic stability. And this respect, actually, Alberto told us that actually it will be necessary somehow to be more self-sustainable and not to develop and not to depend very much on international aid. Of course, it is very good thing, but nevertheless, stopping the war and getting the victory would be much better actually thing. Like restoring security would be much better thing for the country actually to succeed in this exercise. And also offering political risks insurance for businesses all around the globe will be also relevant in order to allow them to come and invest Ukraine at the current stage, because then it can create jobs, it can create actually extra taxes to the state budget, and it will help to be actually self-sustainable as the country. So I would like to conclude by saying that how shall we actually concentrate on building better future? Stimulating private sector in Ukraine, getting access or offering access to cheaper loans, credits for companies. It's not always about grants, although they are important, but nevertheless not I would say the only prerequisite for successful development. Program 579 is indeed very good, but it's necessary to amplify it, to expand it for many other players. And I think that in this respect, support from international players would be really very relevant. Then it's necessary to introduce new private investments to the country. And in this respect, which I mentioned, EU integration processes, also actually big appetite for recovery exceeding $400 billion. And financial instruments like political risks insurance will be necessary. Government role is indispensable in all those things, because transparent dialogue between business, private sector, and governmental leaders and beyond are really important. This should be really transparent dialogue. It should be it should be something which allows businesses to be sure that actually regulations will not change and will not fluctuate on daily basis. On the tax thing, which again Alberto mentioned, of course we would like to see tax framework which will not penalize white and transparent businesses, instead which would probably concentrate better on shadow economy fight, because at the current stage we see that the shadow economy continues to grow, unfortunately. And final mode on the perception of Ukraine abroad. We have now actually our extraterritorial business development arm, which is Global Business for Ukraine, and this institution actually concentrates on creating a network of global companies which might consider working with Ukraine. And the perception of international businesses at the current stage is as follows. Majority follow with much attention what's going on in Ukraine, but they are still afraid to come and invest in Ukraine. Only minority makes now actually brave move and come to the country. Quite often Ukraine is known as either country of corruption, crisis, and war, or nobody understands what's happening there. So that's why we as the business community, as the country as a whole, have to change that, have to present fair picture about what's happening in the business environment, how resilient business is. We should show and demonstrate that there are regions where the business activity really continues. We need to make bridges between those ones which operate in Ukraine with those ones who might be potentially interested. And we as EBA and Global Business for Ukraine will be more than happy to assist in this. And we are doing this already on a daily basis, and we will continue to do so. I will stop.
Thank you, Anna. Speaking of bridges, we have Alexei Sobolev joined us. I hope you are well connected. We can see you, we can hear you. We are discussing now that actually we need to shift from short-term macroeconomic support to long-term programs and to lock investments, bring them to Ukraine, and Ukraine on its part should do its own homework. And Alexei is now in Brussels. And the question to you, like, do you see this shift in perception from short-term support to long-term programs? And what can you update us about progress on Ukraine facility? So hot news right from the center of policymaking.
Thank you. Thanks for the question and for this opportunity. So this is exactly the reason maybe for today's meeting. That both we need more long-term programs, but then there would need to be two focuses. One is preparing the country for post-war growth and like making country more resilient on growth during the wartime, like next year. So these like two focuses and then need to be combined into kind of comprehensive documents and packages, because there are just so many different stakeholders. Then we need to be much better organized. So like this shift is happening right now, and I guess it will be much more clear by the end of the year. So right now everything is like work in progress, and the Ukraine plan development is very much like that. So the whole the plan and the EU facility tied to the plan, or EU facility of 50 billion, should be approved exactly by the end of the year, and the whole plan should be approved in the middle of November. Just wait a second, sorry. So what we have right now is we have a concept note, approved concept note of how like of the most priority reforms and priority sectors for the next 4 years of growth. We also have shown it to G7 countries, and they provided some comments. But what was good about the comments that many of the countries said that like all the topics that they are working on and they think are important and of high priority are included in this kind of plans narrative. So we're on the same track here to get the document that kind of lays out this 4-year really good foundation for the next 4-year growth. So what I want to say is that this is not the everything plan, because, for example, the EU facility of 50 billion that the plan is tied to, the next year budget deficit is $42 billion. So basically 50 billion across 4 years would not cover that. But then it is the foundation. It is a good basis that there will be like 4-year document that everybody understands what are the priority reforms, what are the priority sectors. And then if we need to add something to the plan, there will be a document about that. And it will be comprehensive, and the different parts and different reforms in different sectors would play and improve one another, kind of improve growth. So this would be a good framework to start and to work around, which is gets us back to your question, the coordination. So this would be the document that will provide and enhance the general partner coordination, just because like it will cover 4 years, and basically the most important reforms that we see everybody else is also supporting. The progress is on track, and we will see what the meetings bring today, and we'll have some updates maybe tomorrow. Thank you.
Alexei, thank you very much for finding these precious minutes of your time during your business trip, and thank you very much for everything you do in your work. It gives us hope. So we have some time left for short comments from my colleague Dmitry Livch, and we have some Q&As, some questions asked, and we can combine that. And the first question was if regions are moving towards agro or they are moving towards machine building. Dmitry, comments on that?
Yes, thanks. Thanks a lot. We had a very good and productive discussion today, and a lot of insights covering not only macroeconomic dimension, but also enterprise dimension, regional dimension, and sectorial dimension. And I do believe that currently our economy has quite big challenges, and we need to have this kind of forward-looking thinking towards economic development and economic recovery of our country. And I do believe that the role of regions and the economic geography in this transition would be crucial. And yes, we have kind of two mega trends in place. So the first one is Ukraine's economic recovery and resilience, and the second one is EU integration. And we do understand that those two mega trends can affect Ukraine's regions a bit differently, or they can play in synergy. And that is why having a better understanding on how the post-war economy will work, and what would be the role of different sectors of economy in different regions, what would be the smart specialization of different regions, and how the economy will transform, would be crucial in terms of better understanding of our future economic development, because there are quite many growth constraints as of now. We have a problem of dropping consumption, and we do understand that it is also related to a loss of manpower, because there are a lot of people currently abroad, and our economic policy should be also focused on return on forced migrants to Ukraine, and also creation of available jobs in regions for internally displaced people, because there is some mismatch of available jobs and people on the market who are looking for those jobs. So this is one challenge. Another challenge that is related to agriculture industry and also metallurgy industry that has been mentioned by the audience in comment. And agriculture industry was affected heavily by logistics and mining. And last year, the government of Ukraine and private sector has made significant efforts towards a reshift in our logistical chains. And thanks to our European partners, we had an opportunity to focus more on the river transportation, and also on railway transportation to Central European countries, and then to Baltic seaports or Romanian seaports, and this was very important to Ukraine's agriculture sector. But answering the question regarding this focus on enterprises, we do understand that typically there are three types of sectors. So primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors of economy. And when we are talking about agriculture and metallurgy, they are heavily related on the natural resources, and they can be linked to the territories where they are present. And that is why most probably those industries will remain in those regions that they are present right now. But as Alberto mentioned, EU accession will bring new opportunities in terms of processing sectors or manufacturing sectors to Ukraine. So this means that manufacturing facilities or food processing facilities may be open up either in those sectors where agricultural sector is present or metallurgy is present, or in those sectors that are seeking foreign direct investment. And from our other studies, we do understand that EU integration will affect mostly western and central part of Ukraine, because this was the experience of Central European countries joining in the early 2000s. And when it comes to those regions that are mostly affected by the war, I'm talking about southeast and north part of Ukraine. We need to rethink the economic activity in there. We need to rethink our recovery efforts in there, and we need to play our strengths of Ukraine's economy, and we need to play our competitive advantages, because those regions, they were dependent on large enterprises working in there. And from the analytics that was presented right now in the frontline regions, 56% of the economic output was generated by large enterprises working in heavy economy sectors. And after Ukraine's victory, we need to wrap our minds on how to rethink those economic sectors.
Thank you, Dmitro, for answering these questions. We have now a Q&A session, and our event is coming to the end. Alexey, if you have 1.5 extra minutes to comment, we have a question. I would like to disclose your perspective on first the deregulation of business. Given that Ukraine has weak state institutions at the regional and national levels, how would you see the problem solved for the country post-war reconstruction? So deregulation and further work on this chapter. If possible, can you please answer?
Yeah, so deregulation, we have a massive deregulation effort in the ministry, and Kirilla's team is actually helping us, and Glips, who's also on the call, and we thank them a lot. So the ministry has been through like 1,100 different regulations, reviewed them all, and agreed with all the other ministries responsible for that almost like 250 should be cancelled, and cancelled already like 50. So we have some work for the next year to cancel the other 200 through different cabinet of ministers regulations and laws. But then like more than 500 are set for re-engineering. So a lot of them would be digitalized, and there would be 10 permits digitalized this year, later in the year through e-doзвil system. And many more will be digitalized next year. So we're working on that with the Ministry of Digital. And the other part is that we're kind of, everybody liked the process, I guess, I hope. So this is a part of cross-ministerial working group on deregulation. So we started doing, the next thing is going after inspections. So we're, and the Kirill's team is also helping us with that, and many other stakeholders. So we're looking at the inspections. There are 80 inspections of 30 different bodies. Some of them overlap. So we will optimize that, maybe cancel or kind of centralize some of the inspections, so the businesses would have easier time to communicate with the government. And there's going to be a reform of law enforcement for business. So basically it will be centralized around, I guess, Bureau of Economic Security, but kind of relaunched, more analytical, and we will eventually get it done throughout the next year, maybe year and a half. So what? The business will have less permits. The ones that will stay should be digitalized. There will be much less inspections. The ones that will stay will be on risk basis. So basically, if you're not like low risk profile, you will not see any kind of inspection like for 5 or 7 years. And the inspections that you have will be from the centralized bodies, or like if you do have some problems with law enforcement, they will come after your business only after like extensive analytical work and with, for example, business ombudsman involvement. So everything would be like as transparent as possible. But then we also see that not all businesses behave kind of properly. So this is another side of the issue of deregulation. And for economic recovery, I didn't get quite the feel of the question, like what my thoughts on general recovery, but I would just start with the regions. So the regions is very important. Big part of the plan is like decentralization reform. And we just had a couple of weeks ago an economic advisory council with world's top economists and Nobel laureates. And one of the things that they stressed about, like discussing Ukraine plan, is exactly the decentralization reform that makes Ukraine sustainable, resilient. But then we know that there are other sides of the decentralization reform, that people trust more local governments, but then some local governments misuse funds. So you need to kind of balance this out. So basically, the local government should have both the capacity, the people, and the funding to do reconstruction, but then there should be oversight that, so it not turn into fiefdoms. And that's also kind of in the plan, and there's this is the political discussions that we have here, and I guess they're all in line with whatever Ukraine needs. Thank you.
Kirill, if I may a little bit comment on decentralization, and because I remember more than 10 years ago, some Swiss delegation came and they actually explained what was the prerequisite of successful decentralization in Switzerland at that stage. And they mentioned, and I agree with this very much, that the rule of law and judicial system is the good prerequisites in order to allow actually proper decentralization. So in this respect, I would really urge our government and our country in general to upgrade rule of law, to upgrade judicial system, because that can be the attraction point not only for decentralization purposes, but it can be an attraction point for all kinds of investors. I mean, transparent investors and transparent businesses. So in this respect, let's concentrate on this, and then the rest will emerge out of the rule of law, I guess.
Thank you, Anna. I think it's also worth mentioning that there probably would be a lot of changes in law enforcement agencies organization, and this Bureau of Economic Security will be upgraded quite a lot. So we will see a lot of changes there. So let's answer a couple more questions. So there was a question about how come that ecological component is not included into research. Probably it's our professional deformation as economists. So totally agree with you. We try to check those areas which are less researched, and the damage of war and ecology is well researched in our opinion, and it's well done by Ministry of Ecology. But anyway, we'll probably add the chapter, and you will see much more actually news coming from the Ministry of Ecology in upcoming weeks and months in climate policy, in green those rules for recovery, this green framework. So keep you posted. We'll keep you posted. Then there was a question about human capital, about the forecasts of labor force, and how to return our citizens which came abroad. And I think it's a good question for Metro, and a good opportunity to announce our forum on human capital, which we will organize probably on the 25th of October, and everybody's invited. Metro, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for raising this question. We just recently presented our research findings on labor market in Ukraine, and we do understand that the question of return of forced migrants into Ukraine could cost Ukraine next 10 years for up to $113 billion of GDP and around $45 billion of tax revenues. So this issue is quite high, and we do understand that there are a lot of research going on, and European Commission and Eurostat is presenting that around 3.9 million Ukrainians are staying in EU countries, but we do believe that there are around 6 million people abroad, counting on US, Canada, and other countries, and we are actually working on this topic quite heavily, not only on return on forced migrants, but also on sources of talents for Ukraine's recovery, because we do believe that if we would really like to double Ukraine's GDP over the next 10 years, we need to either return all the people that have been working and living in Ukraine, or significantly increase productivity, or even both. So this is one of the priorities. And also, what are the reasons for Ukrainians to come back? That basically that government can act on is mitigating the factors that was heavily researched by Center for Economic Strategy and Lipa Shlinsky. This is security reasons, this is infrastructure reasons, economic stability reasons, and we as Ukraine should create for all of Ukrainians the same conditions without any discrimination. And those conditions as infrastructure for living, infrastructure for work, infrastructure for personal development for all the people that are living in Ukraine. And at the end of this month, we are planning to have a huge discussion, bringing academia, experts, think tanks, government representatives, international development partners, and discuss human capital in Ukraine. What will be the future of the labor market? How can we actually bring Ukrainians home? how can we increase our economic productivity, how can we have better inclusivity in this process. So please follow the news that are coming from our organizations, and we would be really happy to see people registering for this event.
And we have confirmed agreement to participate from Yulia Sviridenko, from Tatiana Berezhnak, who is also Deputy Minister of Economy. So we'll bring Minister of Social Policy, Minister of Digital, so a lot of actually stakeholders, and we'll talk about administration of human capital aspects in this country. So we promised this event will end till 11:30, so I cannot allow myself to hold you more on this call. I think it was a great discussion. I want to thank, first of all, GIZ, our sponsor of donor for this event. This event was organized by Center for Economic Recovery in the framework of the project Innovation Lab for EU Association of Ukraine that is implemented by the German federal company GIZ. So thank you very much for your support. Thanks to all the panelists. I think your contribution was super great. We'll include all those insights into updated report and send it to all those who registered, and we'll keep you posted on our future events. Thank you very much and have a safe day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.